Welcome to the panel room. Today we're talking about Stargate, but before we get started, let's go around the room, let everyone introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Rachel.
Hi, I am Rachel Carr, but I write under R.E. Carr because Rachel Carr wrote vegan cookbooks, and I don't want to be confused with that. This R.E. Carr writes science fiction, which is what's pertinent tonight, and urban fantasy, particularly science fiction urban fantasy. If you want to check me out, you can find me at www.rachelecarr.com or pretty much on every social media as Total Recar.
All right, Mark.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Haynes, and along with my co-writer and best friend, JC Vaughn, one of my many best friends. JC and I started working together about 30 years ago, and I fed him once, and that was the end of it. So he just keeps finding his way back. But amongst the many things that we have been able to work on together, writing both comics and TV, comic book wise, was we wrote and published and edited a comic based on the original Battlestar Galactica. Then we also worked on 24 for IDW, comic book version of that show. And then most recently, Jeff has many more recent comics than I do. I'll let him get into that. But we were lucky enough to get involved writing Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe comic books for American mythology, which was a lot of fun. And we got our chance to kind of do what we thought would have happened with a continuation of Stargate Universe. So we'll get into that hopefully. So, but that's it for me. Otherwise, right now, writing and producing, working on 3 or 4 different shows out here in Hollywood, and one of which also with JC Vaughn for Roddenberry Entertainment, which is very close to something happening, but unfortunately we can't talk about that yet. On social media, you can find me at Mark Haynes on Twitter, MarkHaynes, which I do not update enough. Thank you.
All right, Jim.
I'm Jim Dettles. I'm a science fiction fantasy writer. I also write about technology, privacy, security, data, a whole bunch of other weird stuff, as well as a bunch of consulting and fun kind of things along those lines. And of course, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on IG. I occasionally show up. I do throw myself through Twitter occasionally. That Hive of Scum and Villainy, but that's a wrong series. We're on the wrong series. Wait, that was. And a few other places as well. And of course, then here at ConTinual, they occasionally let me out of my cage.
Nancy.
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books, and I write science fiction mystery adventure with my friend Jeannie Adams. And I've been a Stargate fan since about the 4th or 5th season of SG-1. And I've watched them all. I do have my personal favorites, but maybe we'll get into that and maybe we won't. We'll see how it goes. And you can find me as Nancy Northcott on my website, on Twitter, where unlike Mark, I spend far more time than is good for me, and occasionally on Facebook.
All right. Bishop?
I'm Bishop O'Connell. I write urban fantasy. I have the American Fairy Tale series. It's sort of modernized takes on traditional fairy tales in the United States. And I have a weird Western alternate history fantasy story coming out, hopefully here shortly this year from Falstaff, called The Two-Gun Witch, which is basically elves and dwarves being involved in post-Civil War America. And I am not to be confused with the high school. You can find me online at A Quiet Pint is my blog, which I don't update nearly enough. And you can find me on the Twitters and on Facebook at Bishop M. O'Connell. If you don't include the M, you will get a high school. I do not mind being confused for a high school, but that's a separate issue. I'm hoping one day I'll get invited to speak there. But and that is my name, not my title, although I do still reserve the right to excommunicate people who tick me off.
All right. Finally, JC.
I'm JC Vaughn. I am the Vice President of Publishing for Gemstone Publishing, which is the home of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. That is my day job, which is a pretty cool day job. I run a book that I grew up reading. And so that's a lot of fun. Matter of fact, literally, as we're recording this, tomorrow, our 51st edition comes out. As Mark mentioned, we have a background together and separately in licensed comics. And Mark mentioned 24, which was a lot of fun, and Galactica, which we learned a lot of painful lessons, but in hindsight was a lot of fun. And Stargate, which gave me the chance to jump into a property that I love since the first movie. And we saw done substandard in comics, some really decent stories, and even some decent line art turned into hideous messes. And we got to take our chance at it, and we are hopeful that we will be able to do so again in the near future.
I will interject here too. As Jeff mentioned, we've known each other for quite a long time, and both 24 and Stargate SG1, when they came on, I was not interested in watching on television. Jeff was my roommate during a period where 24 had just come out on DVD, and the cable was out, so it was the only thing there to watch, and he'd gone to visit his parents or some such thing.
Grandparents in Pittsburgh.
So I was just like, this sounds like a gimmick. I am not interested. And as far as that Stargate show, I don't want to pay for Showtime, and screw it. I'm just not interested. And then, of course, he persisted. And then, what I actually considered two of the highest profile things that I worked on were shows that he had to convince me to watch. But then I fell in love with him. So
you suffer.
The best part was when I came home that weekend. We lived in Baltimore at the time, and I had driven up to Pittsburgh to see my grandparents. And I came home, and Mark's eyes were bleeding, and he's like, "Just one more episode, please."
The hair that I had at the time was like all kind of crazy. Yeah, and it was. And he's like, "Open a window."
Oh, the early days of binging where we didn't understand the long-term effects.
Right. That's true.
Well, the first question, I do want to preface it because in doing the research for this, I realized that the day we are filming this is the anniversary of the first episode of Stargate SG-1. So 24 years ago tonight.
Wow. Oh my God.
Was when it started. So with that in mind, not trying to make people pick that show, but what is the first memory you do have of Stargate, and what kind of sparked your interest? And I'll go ahead and start with you, Mark, since you said you didn't like it, didn't want to watch it in the beginning.
I knew it was on, and I was kind of like, oh, it's the guy from MacGyver, like how, it's going to be kind of weird. I don't know how to explain it. I just was not interested. And again, it was on a pay cable network when it started, so that was a little bit off-putting. And I honestly, I think I first saw it on like a free weekend, where they're trying to get subscribers. And I didn't start with the first one. I actually had to go back and dig that up, wait for them to rebroadcast it, because you couldn't just turn on your computer and find what you wanted to watch. But to me, it was the thing that really kind of stood out was the fact that although the show is incredibly funny, as it goes along, it's the kind of funny that you would have in any workplace. So in some ways, it's like a workplace dramedy, because these are contemporary Americans or contemporary people for the rest of us, and then they would bring in international people in the later series and later in SG-1. But it really was the kind of thing where I'm like, I think this is how we would react to human beings of the contemporary human beings would react to this type of thing. And I appreciate that they didn't shy away from that. And then, as we get into the discussion, this will probably come up too. The thing that really struck me was that they didn't shy away from O'Neill's trauma with his son, kind of being at the kind of the foundation level of his sarcasm and his kind of resistance to authority and things like that. But he would always rein that in when things were getting serious. And I just really liked the way they played it. And of course, they managed to get a team. You could see how they evolved over time, but they got a team that, you know, stuck together through what, 6-7 years before some people started dropping out and changing and coming back and doing all kinds of things. And it's funny because that's one of the shows that survived that very well, I think. So I think that's really what got me into it. And just, you know, the fact that they would do things like, you know, there's well, we were before we started recording, we were talking about a later episode called Window of Opportunity, which is what Rachel mentioned is her favorite and is quoted. There are even people who don't know Stargate who know the things that happened in that episode. And if you take the two least scientifically inclined characters and put them in this situation where they have to explain it to the scientist types, and like, this show didn't shy away from doing that stuff, and I really appreciated that. So,
Jim?
Yeah.
Well, I actually, and I even saw the original movie in the theater, but I saw the first pilot night of SG-1 on Showtime. It was kind of by accident, but it was I actually was at home and was bored. It was like, all right, why not? And give it a shot, and dove into it. And it became one of those shows, okay, you know, you're going to catch it, you're going to repeat it. You know, thankfully on Showtime and stuff, even in those days, you had a couple of shots. I was traveling pretty heavy in those days anyway, so me catching something was hit or miss. But I caught it kind of from the beginning, and it pulled me in because that was also during those days when it was like, okay, it's sci-fi, I will take what I can get that is not, you know, not yet even developed well enough to be Sharknado. But it was sci-fi. It was good sci-fi, but they had some good hard science to it. That it was kind of the early days when people were still getting this idea of seeing those first representations of the idea of a wormhole. It wasn't, okay, we're going to fly ships here to the creature of the week. It's going to be, okay, we're going to jump through something. And to me, in a certain way, it was almost like introducing cell phones into modern fiction, because you always had a way to get there. I mean, you know, it was a little bit of that same story like for Time Tunnel back in the 60s of you jump through the wall, you jump back, but you had that ability to come back and forth. So you took away some of the Star Trek type issues of, even though you can beam down to a location or a place in a communicator, it was one of those things that shook up that motif a lot. And because I also have some background in anthropology, I got really interested in how are they playing the cultures and different people and different groups. And, you know, you've got this planet over here that worships this fake deity. You've got this planet over here that's worshiping this fake deity, and how they play off to each other. So, I mean, to me, it was really interesting and fun to watch. The first season got some slow stuff, but once they found their footing, it was one of those you couldn't stop watching. And I've watched all of them and all the different series and all the different incarnations. And so, yeah, it was one of those early, you know, getting hooked sort of things.
Well, I'd like to pick up on what Jim said about when they found their footing, because I didn't find the series until after they had already figured out what to do with Carter, who's my favorite character. Love Daniel Jackson because geek, but Carter's my favorite character. And when I went back and watched the earlier episodes, it was clear that they had not figured out yet how to write a strong woman. There was some scene where she was giving them advice and she made some comment. I was literally sitting there cringing about, well, it's just because my reproductive organs are on the outside or something like that. And I thought, oh, please, I'm so glad that you moved away from this. And then there was one episode where they were on a planet and the warlord wanted to marry Carter and add her to his harem, and she ended up fighting him. And so if those were the ones I had stumbled across first, I don't know that I would have stuck with it. But one of my favorites, because they had figured it out, was a season-ending cliffhanger, and they were trapped on a gold ship, and they were trying to escape. And the way they figured it was Carter was going to have to blow up a sun. And one of the guys is standing there talking to her, and she goes, I need a minute. I've never blown up a sun before. And, you know, somehow that just worked. It wasn't a cringe line. It wasn't an, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. It was just great. And I do think they found their footing. And I like the fact that there was a strong emphasis on we're going to do what's right. Like the episode where they get contact through the wormhole, and Renee Aubergenois is the head of this civilization, and they're under attack from these other people. And they've got all this tech that Stargates and the Air Force want. So SG-1 goes in and they're on these people's side, and Daniel's sitting there going, wait a minute, we don't know enough here, wait a minute. And he gets brushed off first, but then more things start to look odd, and O'Neill says to him, you keep asking questions. And they went in despite wanting the tech and did what was right. And that's one of the things I always liked about that show.
Bishop?
Yeah, it's I saw the movie in the theaters too, and I remember when I saw that they were going to be doing a television series, my first thought was, how the heck are they going to pick it up? The movie pretty much wrapped it up pretty well. But I was actually working for an answering service at the time, really date myself. It was an oddity even at the time, but I worked the back shift, 11 at night till 7 in the morning. And one of our clients was the local cable company. So we got free full cable. And I basically spent most of my time in the break room watching TV because nobody called an answering service those hours. And I remember watching it and I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, part of it was like what Jim said, it was like, well, you know, it's sci-fi, so take what I could get. And I was like, okay, well, this is kind of a cool idea, kind of an interesting premise. And yeah, I remember writing it out, and it was definitely, the first season was a little rough, but I think once they, like Nancy said, once they started to find a place for it. Now, I crushed hard for Carter for the whole series. I mean, a super smart woman that I knew could kick my ass was just everything that I wanted at that time in my life. But the premise of, you know, I was always into mythology and things like that, so the different cultures really pulled me in. But for me, it really started to become the interplay of the characters, that it was much more of a character-driven show than it was a plot-driven show. They could have been sitting around reading the phone book and I would have tuned in to watch, because the interplay was so great. They had such a great chemistry with each other, you know. And I really liked, especially as the show went on, what nailed it for me was they never took themselves too seriously either. I mean, you know, you've got Wormhole Extreme, that was basically an entire series of episodes where they were making fun of themselves, and they were doing it happily, and they did a great job of it, you know. And I mean, was it 100 or 200, the episode where there was all the different versions? Yeah, 200.
200.
Which that is probably tied for window of opportunity for my favorite episode of all time, just because of the line, you know, when Neil makes his triumphant return. And somebody was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. It's like, no, it'll leak. Are you kidding? They'll be used in the promos. And they used it in the promos. And so, I mean, to me, that's really what it was. It was, you know, a group of people that, you know, you could feel the chemistry. And that's what drew me in. I mean, it's the same way with most fiction for me, is if I like the characters, I'll sit through just about anything.
Okay. JC?
Well, I think both what Jim and Bishop and Mark said, where I saw it at the theater. I saw it the first night on Showtime. I had no idea how they were going to make a show out of going back and forth to Abydos.
Yeah.
Okay. And I literally could not get out of that box. And then, I suppose that was figuratively, not literally.
It was in the DVD set.
As soon as they went to a different planet, the whole thing exploded in my head of the possibilities. And that was phenomenal. And I agreed, first season was uneven, but it was certainly intriguing enough that I kept tuning in. And as the show grew, and you get the situational humor that you get from work or family, even in dark times. I mean, you know, you have side comments. The thing that I liked, and Mark pointed this out to me very early on, was ended up being one of the things I love dearly about it, is the characters, and this was the writing, the characters remembered stuff from episode to episode. And
talked about it casually.
And yeah, and talked about it casually, like, oh, this is like that. And, you know, we have other examples of show, and again, to quote Mark, that Chuck Cunningham was one of the 4,400. Richie Cunningham's older brother that was there
just disappeared
for 8 episodes, played by 2 people. And even when you get to the last episode of Happy Days, Howard Cunningham talks about his 2 children, even though both of the guys that played Chuck were in the crowd scene. Okay. So you know, I adored the fact that it could be deadly serious and somebody would make an inappropriate comment, because it's what I would do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A lot of us would do. We're science fiction fans.
Yeah.
And I really think that's I think that's what grabbed me about the series. It's what opened me up to the two other series, Atlantis and Universe. And I think to me, that's pretty great.
Rachel?
Oh, there was.
Oh, yes, there's Tsunami. She decided it was
gosh.
my turn. Yep, I told you she'll just jump up in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize in advance for anyone I make feel bad with the comments I'm about to make, because see, I had to have my dad take me to see Stargate.
Yeah, I'm
but
done.
he was an anthropologist and obviously raised me as a nerd. So you can imagine, if you will, 6 goths in a station wagon being taken by an anthropologist to go see a movie called Stargate. We all came out and in full like makeup, all black. We just go in and we're in the theater and you can see everybody looking at us. And it was one of those kind of crazy zeitgeist moments in my life.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it going, this is so awful. And this is so wonderful. I love everything about it, but I didn't have Showtime, and my parents didn't get it for me. So I had to go, and I watched it when it came on Sci-Fi and then had to catch up on the syndicated episodes.
Yep.
So I got this weird, I got to see it in its stride and then had to go back and go, wait, what? There's nudity?
Yeah.
On episode 1, and then it never happens again. It's almost like, what was the first episode? Like, we're gonna shock everyone, and I could go on a whole tangent nobody wants to hear about, interesting enough, whose titties you get to see and whose you don't in that episode. But no, I saw it and I was like, nobody can ever be my Daniel Jackson, because I had a huge crush on James Spader, being like a teenager when I first saw him. Sorry guys, again, for anyone I make feel bad. But then I saw Michael Shanks and it was like, I can watch this show. And then they got Ben Browder later and I'm like, I think there was a plot, but I will admit there was very little time that I cared by the time because I was a huge Farscape fan, and when they reinvented it, it had Ben Browder and Claudia Black, so they had me at hello.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I came in, as said, in that weird lapse, but it was a weird way my childhood. And I look at some of my science fiction that I wrote and go, my influences weren't so much Star Trek and Star Wars, although everyone of our generation has it. I'm like, there's a lot of Stargate. It's that office humor that you were saying that creeps in, because I loved the show where it felt like absolutely real people doing completely ridiculous things, and that just always hit a chord with me. Yeah,
absolutely. And you something you mentioned there, you definitely have to kind of tip your hat to Michael Shanks, because
he had the hardest part by far, I think.
Yeah, and you can see from episode 1 probably to the end of the season, maybe a little bit past, but not much, where he was kind of imitating Spader at the beginning before he kind of took it over.
He was just the guy that looked like Spader.
I feel like they gave him direction though, like just act like James Spader.
Yeah,
I think I got that information. But man, when he got the haircut, like everyone in the panel who thinks so, when he got the haircut, you know what I'm talking about, right?
He got the haircut and he started working out, and he started wearing like the sleeveless outfit.
There's nothing wrong with this.
And exactly. And it's like, you look at that and you think, okay, not only is this a good thing for the fans, it makes sense for this character who has to have this kind of training that he would not have normally had otherwise. And I think that's actually a plot point through it in here.
It is. I mean, because they kind of carry forward this idea of, okay, you're an anthropologist, by the way, you fell in love and got married to an alien on another planet that's sort of human, but that's great. That's fine. Go over there. You've got family, it's fine. But I think his was one of the biggest characters to develop, because they had to take him from the conspiracy theorist to from the film.
Yeah, the
still carry, right? To carry that forward into the first season, where there's still that whole, I can't believe this is actually real. I know I talked about it, and they did some of those university scenes of, hey, can I talk to you? I need a little help because Yeah, it was. I was kind of right about a couple of things. You're full of shit.
Like all of it.
Yeah. No. I really need you to come back. Yeah, I can just see what it took to get the security clearances, though, for some of those.
Alien? I think the
Yeah.
alien probably had the biggest one.
I'm
Right.
not sure. I think some of those university professors to get to Cheyenne Mountain, I know what it takes to get to Cheyenne Mountain.
Well, for
I don't think
Tokyo,
I
it
could
wasn't the getting in, it was the getting out was the hard.
Right.
Yeah.
that took years. Right.
You know, though, that they had to say when they went to Area 51 that the Air Force, who were their consultant, said you can't say that any implication that they were aliens here. So they had to rewrite the line specifically because the Air Force said it. They said, other than Teal'c, there's no aliens here.
Right.
It's one of those great, like
Funny.
the Air Force loved Stargate, and I always thought
yeah.
that was cool. It was kind of like how, like, Babylon 5 had the support of NASA, but Stargate had the Air Force.
Stargate actually had a number of real Air Force personnel show up on camera, so that was really pretty cool.
Well, Stargate was for the Air Force what like Top Gun was for the Navy. I mean, it was a great recruiting source for them. And I thought it like, because I have a friend who ended up joining the Air Force, and I think it really put across the image that the Air Force wanted, that we're the brainy branch, right?
Mm.
And you get to play
My-
golf.
My brother retired as a major from Air Force Special Ops, and he described Air Force basic training. NBC had come out with a Marine basic training reality show for one season, and my brother said Air Force basic training would be a half-hour sitcom.
We love you, Air Force. We're not judging you. Don't worry.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm two
Just Stanley's
generations.
all Air Force, right? I think.
And I grew up as a Navy brat, so I remember hearing the stories about one of the Navy bases that when the contractors built it, it was originally for the Air Force, and the Air Force said, no, we won't take it because the housing is too substandard for our people. And the Navy said, no, we'll take it. That kind of tells you everything you need to know.
Pacifist.
Well,
And there's word also that there is a broom closet named Stargate Command at Cheyenne Mountain.
Yep.
Oh
So
my
that's-
God.
They're
Yeah.
Oh, it's labeled. That's funny. That'd be
Yeah.
great.
they swear it's a broom closet and there's nothing else inside. But
Of course, not a Stargate. Plus, if there is
Absolutely
totally
no
Stargate and you're
aliens agree.
listening, I volunteer.
And there's absolutely no aliens at Area 51 either.
There are absolutely no aliens at Area 51. We will say this again very clearly while we're on YouTube.
None.
Shocked
UFOs
to
are
find
real.
gambling in this
Aliens.
establishment.
so
Yes.
Jim, now that we've kind of covered the basics of how everyone got in, what is your favorite iteration? Because we've got 3 series. There was apparently, I was not aware of.
there's actually a web series.
cartoon,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of stuff
and of course comics.
and comics and all that sort of stuff. I really liked all of them. I really wanted to see more universe. SGU, Stargate Universe, was one that really kind of took a lot of the mythology they built. I mean, I really loved Atlantis when they brought into that and the things that they did with that. But then it became how do we kill the Wraith of the Week? And SGU was almost an entirely different thing. It was more about what are the problems we have to solve as a group and as a team. And I think that was, and because you had military, you had civilian, you had hardcore geeks, and you had a lot of people that were not prepared to be in that environment. They got thrust from, by the way, the Stargate we're at is under attack, so we're just going to shove everybody on a ship and good luck. That idea of you had a ton of people thrown into an environment where they were not prepared, not trained, and a lot of them not expecting to be there because of dignitaries and scientists and all this other sort of stuff. That to me was really the fascinating part. Plus that idea of being thrown into an environment that's tens of thousands of years old, that's just been flying through and sort of running on autopilot. What works, what doesn't? How does the technology work? It was interesting because it was so different. Even the filming style was so different.
Mhm.
Very
It was-
Battlestar Galactica.
It was very Battlestar Galactica. It was very stark. It was it very much jolted you from it's not, we're not doing this adventure of the week anymore to this is a conflict that people have to solve. And but you still managed to keep some of that sense of humor and the gallows humor and watching the relationships build and those sorts of things, I thought was really the fun part. And the way that they treated some of the kind of edge science and BS science that they played with, I thought was really fun. And because I thought it was much more of a stretch than the other two shows had been, or the other shows had been at that point.
Yeah. I'd love to follow that up and because that's my favorite as well. You know, the others are very comfortable to watch. I feel I have warm feelings for all of them, but it's, you know, in Atlantis, it's kind of, they started with, we're going to be completely cut off. And then a couple months later, they're not cut off. And then a couple months after that, you just take your time. If you want to go back, just go back. You want to go back and get a cheeseburger, that's cool. And then you can come back to Atlantis. So you're not really that far away. But when you get to Universe, you're like, okay, this is still a dangerous job. But as you point out, and Jeff and I, we had this discussion at the last GateCon in Vancouver, which is still a fantastic show, and I highly, highly recommend if you can go next September. I think that they're doing it if the unpleasantness we've been experiencing for the last going to be 2 years, right? 18 months, something like that. Once that settles down, or we learn how to live with it, you know, go to this convention because it's a lot of fun. But that said, Universe, what I really liked about Universe was, as you were talking about, these are not the explorers. These aren't the people that signed up for this. These are people who, one of them was an HR person, for gosh sakes. I mean, she had the clearances because obviously she started out on Icarus base at the beginning of the series. But Ming Na's character is kind of an example of, by this point, it's a government program that's almost 20 years old. There's going to be people working in this program that don't care about the wonder of alien planets, if they even know about that, you know, because there's accountants, there's various other people. And so you're like, yeah, I don't want to be here, you know, and that played a huge factor. And I think that was the jarring difference. The previous two iterations were people who were looking forward to that job, and they loved that job.
I agree with that, Mark, not surprisingly, I guess. That,
and this is recorded, so you can't change your mind later.
I can watch.
For a nominal fee, we can arrange that. But
yeah, the thing that is interesting to me about that, there's a bit of a dichotomy, because everything you guys have said about the characters is true, but the nature of the series, the very setup of the series, for most of it, they had a built-in ticking clock, and it would reset. But they had to, you know, first they're going to run out of oxygen. Next, they're going to run out of this. Next, they can't stay on a planet for too long, or they'll be left behind permanently forever. Blah, blah, blah. You know, all these things. So it is not a distant cousin of the running, jumping, shooting sci-fi action thing. It's a weird brother or uncle. You know, it's all that stuff is still in there. It's just there's more layers. And I remember saying to Mark at the time, actual science fiction is actually occurring.
Well, and in that respect, it reminded me a lot of Space 1999.
Yeah.
That idea of, you've got these windows of time. Now, I don't know how realistic it is that the moon is going to be moving at relativistic speeds, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, it reminded me a lot of that Space 1999 aspect of, you're here, you have these limited periods of time to do resupply, deal with challenges, deal with other things like that. And that was one of those things that was reminiscent of for me.
It's a little bit of the gilded cage thing of, this is our prison, we're stuck here. Oh, but we're safe here.
Yeah.
We're relatively safe here.
Yeah, and I like the used universe aspect of it. That it was that, you know, I always like the idea that, and that's, to me, that's what the new Star Wars series have done well, is the idea of all this fantastical tech, but it's like broken down. You know, it's the same thing with Firefly, that it's all this super advanced stuff, but, you know, it's showing that it's not miraculous. It does eventually wear out. It does eventually run down, and then, oh hell, we got to go grab the duct tape and the baling wire to hold this all together. And by the way, you know, even though this is 10,000 years old, it's still about 1,500 years ahead of where we are now.
Yeah.
Mark and I have a comic book creator friend whose son is completing welding school. And I looked at the kid and said, stuff is never going to stop breaking. I think that's
Yeah,
It's true.
And he really likes it too. And it's the kind of thing where You're like, it's his. You're doing something with your hands, and it's like that you can't take it away from the set.
We look at we look at this, and I guess going back to SG1, I did like when Carter referred to MacGyvering something.
Yes.
That was an ad lib.
How could you not do that line?
Of course, that was Richard Dean Anderson there.
Right, and Richard Dean Anderson's reaction is legitimate. He didn't know she was going to say it.
That's great.
That's great. That makes it even better to me.
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing.
Now, see, with me, SG1 was always my special love. I liked Atlantis at first, but like you said, when it started to become about how we're going to kill the race this week, it completely lost me. I got back into it when Jewel State came in, just because Jewel State. But it never held my interest. And I actually found Stargate Universe after it went off the air. I bought the DVDs, not realizing that it had ended on a cliffhanger. Spoilers.
Spoilers.
But I started watching it, and I liked that one. It kind of was sort of the opposite for me for SG1, that I liked the setting, but the characters didn't jive as much for me. There was a couple of characters I liked, but they didn't have the same chemistry, and I just didn't like the character premises of some. I can't think of the one scientist who was, the backstabber betrayer. It's
Robert Carlyle's character?
Yeah.
Well, he's Robert Carlyle. You're just looking for the knife in your back whenever he's on screen.
Right. It's just
sorry, Robert.
To me, he was just kind of he was too over the top for me, and but I was able to focus on the other characters to make it more enjoyable, but it was still SG1 for me. It was always the characters. It was like a found family type of thing.
The funny thing to me is you guys mentioned the Battlestar Galactica reboot, Galactica aspects of this, and for the whole first season, I did not like SG1. There was a couple episodes toward the very end of it that I did like, and I thought what they learned from Galactica. See, Galactica gave us something to like about the characters first, then made them jerks.
Yeah.
And this guy's just pretty much started with the jerks. But everything you guys have said about the circumstances, how they got there, particularly Mark, what you were saying about you're taking all these people that didn't belong together on missions. This is all true, and it's all fairly realistic from my perspective as a writer. But at the same time, I'm still a viewer. I want to have somebody I like. So you're sort of stuck hanging your hat on Eli if you want somebody likable at first, right?
Well, he was clearly kind of the point of view character there.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you come into that show, and just having thought about it and rewatched it several times, that you get to the idea that SG1 was about O'Neill until that character left. I mean, that was kind of his arc of, what everything was kind of seen through his lens ultimately. Atlantis, I'm not sure, whose character it was. I feel like
Shepard. I think Shepard.
You think so? Well,
yeah.
I do.
Okay, could have.
The idea being that a universe was about the lead scientist and not the lead military guy. So it was kind of like, here was a guy who lost his wife, lost his and they've established that he was somewhat spiritual before that. Like they would go to church, they would do, he did those types of things with his wife, as you see in that later episode where I think it's, he's in some kind of simulation and the computer is manifesting his wife. So that's who he's talking to, his late wife.
When he's connected to Destiny's chair.
Yeah. And so the idea there that you saw him, it's like you thought, okay, he's going to dig in, he's going to wear all them down. And I think Colonel Young was speaking for a lot of us when he's like, God, he's exhausting. And it really was, it was like, I like this guy. He's clearly the smart guy. Why is he such a dick? Is that PG-13? I don't know. But, as the show went on, as it got towards the end, and it's like, finally they start reaching kind of,
accommodations.
Accommodation where it's like, all right, we're going to do this mission. We're not getting home anytime soon. They finally accept that. And, where Rush starts to reveal what the true mission of the ship is. And that's why he's there. And, aside from the fact that he's known this for months or weeks, I think it was they upset the formula to such a degree. And I don't want to say upset it, I'll say disrupt it, like disruptive technology. It's like, it's still kind of the same thing, but it's so much more ultra realistic than the kind of lighthearted adventure that, and I say lighthearted adventure where it's like there were blood-sucking aliens attempting to get to Earth through the entire course of that show.
Not to mention evil militant Legos rebuilding the universe.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
My favorite.
Anyway, like Stargate Universe, I think it took a little long to get, and you could see when they did the writing change, and then they started encountering more planets, and they're like, okay, we need to bring some of the other stuff back, and you could see them make that change. Anyway, I'm rambling. Sorry, guys.
Well, I think you're on a point there that they were acknowledging that, with Stargate and SG-1 and Atlantis, they had these miraculous saves. Yeah. And so you had all the characters waiting for it in universe.
Yeah.
And it took them forever to go, oh, wait, that's not going to happen like the other shows. So they were also, digging in that way. But
yeah.
Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things I was going to say is, if you look and compare it to like Voyager, where Voyager was, you had two groups very much in conflict and then moving into, but you have those two groups that basically melded in 2 episodes, and it was like, okay, yeah, we've always been on this ship all the time. There was small little, rubbing of heads, but no worse than you'd have had just by taking a crew and throwing them out there.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, because I think part of the reason that Universe didn't catch was they went with that for too long without showing more of the kind of gelling and community that would naturally have to happen, or you're going to start throwing people out of airlocks. I think that didn't happen often enough.
Yeah.
I think that happened off screen more than we think.
Yeah, I was like, Jim, you're probably right, is that it's like it took so long that I'm surprised somebody hasn't killed somebody but before that actually happened,
Hey Nancy, what's your favorite?
Exactly.
I want to know.
Well, I'm kind of a stick in the mud when it comes to my fandoms, in that I tend to remain loyal forever to the first thing I fall in love with. And so that would be SG-1. And I see what everybody's saying about Universe, and I agree with it. But SG-1 is figuring out, how do we juggle the government? How do we juggle these other civilizations? How do we deal with these cultures? And for me, I didn't pick up on it right away, but I think the most interesting character arc in that story is Teal'c, because he starts out as the enforcer for Apophis. Then he's on Earth, and they kind of don't know what to do with him, and they don't want to trust him. Then we find out about the Jaffa culture, and that he has a family, and that there's a movement of Jaffa who want to be free, which Teal'c and Braytak then dive into. And I think one of the best scenes in any of the episodes of any of the shows occurred toward the end, and they were in a ship fleeing from the Ori, and they had Tobin, who had been an enforcer for the Ori, and he had just learned that this was all a sham, that everything he had devoted his life to, even the things that he had done that he thought were right and now realized were horrible, had been done for evil purposes.
Yep.
And he's sitting in the commissary, and Teal'c comes in. And Tobin says something to him like, how do you live with it? I did these things, and what should I do? And Teal'c sits down and he talks to him, and he basically says, you can't atone for it. You can't make up for it. You just deal with it by trying to do, and I'm paraphrasing heavily, the right thing going forward. I think that's one of the best scenes Christopher Judge ever had. And I thought it was one of the most poignant scenes in any of the Star Trek episodes. And so for me, it's always going to be, what?
Stargate. You said Star Trek.
Doofus. Stargate episodes.
Yes.
I
okay.
used to want a flip phone because I could pretend it was a Stargate communicator, and I was really sad when
Star Trek.
But yes, I do understand that we're talking about Stargate, even if I did just ruin the point of the answer I was trying to make. So
I could go shallower if it makes you feel better. Actually, would you like that?
Well, have we talked about your favorite yet?
Well, we
Yes.
have ignored. I'm an OG girl too, but because it's been overlooked, let's all have a moment of thirst for the fact that Jason Momoa joined Stargate Atlantis. We know, no offense, Mr. Rainbow Sun Franks, you were perfectly fine. Glad you got taken over by the Wraith, and we got Ronan Dax.
Yeah.
Because
That
it's
took
like
me longer
watching a
than I thought it was
Pokemon.
going to.
Well, I want to make her feel better. I'm going to splash in the shallow end of the gene pool, okay?
I do appreciate that.
But no, I mean, it is. He's like a Pokemon. He started in Baywatch and he was a starter form and he was cute. And then he got to Atlantis. And he's like that mid form. It's a little bit awkward, but it gets pretty good and has some good moves. And then eventually we get Aquaman, which is the ultimate form. And we can all appreciate that. But no, I love Atlantis was the show that I actually got to see from the premiere though, live and watch it. So it does have a little bit of a special place because I didn't have, as I said, I was too young. And I had to catch up on Stargate SG-1. And I had kind of the same problem with Universe in that as much as I thought the premise could work, it didn't feel as Stargate as some of the others. So Atlantis was that middle child that I kind of got to watch through all its awkward phases and kind of embrace it. And then they got the Momoa. And it did definitely increase in appeal. But I also felt bad because Atlantis kind of had the most Wizard of Oz-y, magical, colorful, bright, and it did devolve eventually into Wraith of the Week. But they had the guy from Enterprise. He was
Picardo,
really good.
Right? Yeah, Rob.
They had Robert
Picardo.
Picardo, and they had he's the one from
Voyager.
Enterprise. The
Oh,
Trip.
yeah.
Yeah.
as the Wraith.
Michael.
Yes.
Connor
Yeah,
Trinneer,
as a Wraith.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah, Connor Trinneer. And I thought he was really good. And I thought
Absolutely.
that they woefully underused a lot of their cast.
Oh my gosh,
But they had Jason Momoa.
yeah.
Yeah, but they also had McKay, and for me,
Mhm.
He was great.
oh, I loathed him. I couldn't. Every time I saw him, I wanted to punch him.
But
Oh,
that's the
see,
point. He did a great job because
Yeah,
every
but
time
that
you
was
saw
too
him,
good.
you wanted to punch him.
Yeah, but to me, it was like he's a kind of character that it's like I think SG-1 used him well. That he's like a strong seasoning that you apply it, conservatively. You sprinkle it in every once in a while to add some flavor. Atlantis, it was like
Horseradish.
right. In Atlantis, it was like he was a giant pile of it on everything, and it was
okay,
just
that's funny because this shows just how different everybody's reactions are. To me, his character made me flinch on SG-1.
Mm.
And I got used to him very quickly on Atlantis. And Atlantis, I recognize the potential story-wise in SGU the most. But I know I was watching the first season of SGU out of loyalty. Now, like I said, by the time it ended, I was like, oh, but that first season, I really had to power through it. Atlantis,
tough.
I loved from the beginning. I think the actors they got are great. I know it starts out as SG-1 light, but I liked it. I thought it had a lot of glue for the lowercase universe.
Did you know in researching when we were doing the comics that Shepard's team actually had all those teams on Atlantis were numbered the same way they were on SG. His team was technically supposed to be referred to as AR1, Atlantis Reconnaissance
Really?
Team 1.
I didn't know that.
They never
Can't
spoke
remember that. Yeah.
But I'm glad.
Hate
they
when
didn't.
AR-15 comes up.
Yeah, I know.
That's just-
Yeah, those guys. That's the military team.
That's the
right?
assault squad.
That's right.
Well, and I think one of the other
that show was, I'll say this about McKay is that he drove me crazy at the beginning of that show because but if you look at that character from his appearances in SG-1, which would have been like you solve the crisis, right? You help solve the crisis, you are immediately going to human resources because of the way you talk to people, and how they kind of modulated that into the first season of the show. He was very edgy, but he was so whiny. I'm like, you volunteered. You shouldn't be this whiny for something you volunteered for.
Mhm.
I beg to differ. I'm an American woman and I can whine whenever I want when I'm given
He's
something
Canadian.
I asked for.
He's Canadian.
Oh, well, then there's no excuse.
He's supposed to
Well,
be polite while he whines.
Right,
I
and
do
that's
have
the other
one
thing.
interjection. Has anyone noticed that every planet in the universe strangely looks like Vancouver?
Oh my
Speaking of
gosh!
Canada.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait a minute.
Wait, what?
What?
I know. So much of the universe looks like the Pacific Northwest. It's amazing.
Well,
I
didn't
learned
one of the
from
episodes of
Stargate.
SG1 actually caught like hang a lantern on the fact that everybody also spoke English?
Yes, that one was
Which-
pretty good too.
Yeah. So that to me was another thing that I loved about
Hang a lantern on
SG1.
it, huh? That's
Yeah.
not a 200 reference, right?
No, not a 200 reference. Well, we were trying like hell. When we Jeff and I were approached to do the Atlantis comic, we submitted a bunch of different ideas, and one of the ideas was a Martin Lloyd story of where they were basically, Ben Browder's character had basically figured out a way to kind of push off Martin Lloyd onto the Atlantis crew. It was basically like payback for something that Shepard had done to him. And so he was out there for the it was going to be a streaming series about Wormhole. Wormhole Extreme was coming back as an online series. Well, they didn't go for it, but
I would have
that
paid to
needed to
see
be
that.
I thought that would have been so much fun.
Yeah. Wow.
So next question, I'll start with you, Nancy. How do you think they did on all the series with representation?
We are talking about Stargate, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're on Babylon 5. It's
Oh, I know that one.
Well, I think if you look at each of them within the context of their times, they were still ahead of society as a whole. And of course, I'm always going to be biased toward SG1 because of Carter. And generals listen to Samantha Carter, even though she was a captain and then a major. But when you look into Atlantis, they actually had more ethnic diversity, which I think was good. And the installation was run by a woman. And speaking of that and of Carter, when Richard Dean Anderson left the show, I really expected Carter to step up to lead the team. I realized the military doesn't always operate on the theory of taking turns, and so it was believable that she didn't. And I liked Ben Browder's character, but I thought that I felt kind of shortchanged on behalf of my favorite character for a while. And I didn't watch a lot of Universe because, as others have said, the characters didn't click for me. I thought the setup was interesting, but I watched a couple, 3 episodes, and I just didn't find anybody I felt like, yeah, I'm in that person's corner. I felt sorry for all of them. So I can't really, but I didn't really say, yeah, I'm rooting for y'all. Like with Voyager, I was rooting for Kate Mulgrew from the get-go because I liked her character and I wanted her to do well. So I don't know that I'm the best person to speak to that. In terms of what I saw, it seemed to be fine, but others would know more about that than I do.
It's part of the reason, again, doing the research for this, that she did not get command was, as Amanda Tapping was maternity leave right around that time period. So she wasn't able to be there, but she was expecting, the actress said she was expecting to take command. But also, like you were saying, looking at this from context of the time period, we look at this, we had her, Carter, in the middle, in the thick of things, in battle, in this show, 13 years before the US military allowed women into battle. So, Bishop, moving on to.
Yeah, I mean, as a cishet white guy, I'm sure my opinion representation is really going to be key.
Yeah.
They did have a person of color and a woman, so I don't know what else.
The 90s.
Right, I don't know what else they could have possibly done. I do think, though, I agree that it's for the time. I think it was definitely ahead of the curve. Honestly, though, that's where McKay really started to bother me, because I was just getting to the point in my own self that I was just beginning to pry my own head out of my ass and start to see things. So McKay's cringiness really kind of like rubbed me raw, because I could see aspects of the way I had behaved and the way some of my other friends had behaved. You know, obviously not to that extreme, because I mean, he's purposely a caricature, right? But that was one of the reasons it didn't sit well with me, is it's because I was just starting to realize the fact and seeing this stuff and saying, that's just not cool. You know, that's not just taking you to HR. That's somebody who needs to take you out back and you know, curb stomp you once or twice. Because I mean, there were some definite cringe moments that they had in there. But you could, I think the show, it definitely went with, you could tell that the first episode was obvious titillation. I mean, hence the whole reason of a full frontal nudity shot in one episode.
But only of a certain woman. Let's just
Right.
have that one really cringe-worthy, the white woman got to keep her bra on moment.
Oh yeah, obviously, right. I mean, it was just, you know, we got to go with the exotic, you know, the you know, no fetishizing happening there at all.
Deep breaths, deep breaths. Do not go on a rant, Rachel. Do not go on a rant. Wants to go on a rant, but won't go on a rant.
But I liked that as the show evolved. I mean, it also went along as society kind of went along. And I think it may not have always been far ahead of the curve, but I think compared to other television at the time, it was definitely ahead of the curve. And I mean, it's like you said, Nancy, that was one of the things I really liked about Carter, at least once they let her be Carter, was the fact that she had gravitas, she had authority, you know, that it was people, when she talked, people really did listen, except for McKay, which is probably another reason I didn't like him, because he was fronting on my girl. But it was definitely a step towards the right direction. I think Atlantis was kind of like, well, we started this, so let's grow it and bloom it out some more. But yeah, it was, and I even think I remember, I rewatched the series not long ago, and I think I remember seeing that there were some episodes where some of the body swapping happened, that I was like, wow, this is sort of kind of early nods to like trans rights here, that it was like keying into this. It wasn't really direct, it was really, really subtle. And again, cishet white guy, so I could be completely talking on my backside.
The Osiris storyline, that was actually pretty good.
Yeah. So I thought, well, that was kind of interesting. And I mean, they definitely got more courageous as the show went on, because obviously they could. You know, the longer the show had been around, the more fan base it built up. You know, you've got more credibility with, you know, if you do a flop, it's not getting in the series. People will just brush it off and let it go.
But they still had the Hathor episode. No woman ever really was totally in charge unless she was a civilian and appointed. And Carter was basically a Black Widow, because they couldn't have her in any long-term relationship because they had to keep the will they won't they with O'Neill. Let's just lay it all out. The rant slipped out. I'm sorry. It just
I don't even like to talk about Hathor. That was just
we just Hathor says it all. There was still some late 90s misogyny in a lot, particularly in the early seasons. At least thank the Lord they did not put Carter in like some skinny little altered uniform for most of it. I will give them credit.
Yeah, there were no slave Leia costumes, thankfully.
Not too many. There were a few. There were a few.
A couple that they put in early, but that would not have worked the farther you got into it, you know. And it's like it's interesting, because I think, again, you know, as Bishop said, it's just white guys, so I'm not sure what value this has.
I'm here to smack you if you get out of line.
I mean, it's funny, because the way as far as I know, through the course of that show, there might have been the writing and producing staff was mostly guys, wasn't it? For most of that show. And the fact that they were able to bring us, this was my perception anyway, was that they tended, when those issues would come up, they didn't shy away from them, but they were always kind of like, we have this bigger thing that we need to deal with. This is important too, but we're all in the context of kind of solving this thing. And as Nancy mentioned earlier, Carter's cringeworthy comment about where her sexual organs were on the inside rather than the outside. I mean, you know, even just as a writer, you're like, what was that? And so, but yeah, I mean, as came later, and Carter's character, having continued through all of them, rose to command. And I, circling back to kind of where that started, is like, I was disappointed that she didn't get command. And I know that it sounds like it was a confluence of real world circumstances and them having to write around that.
They could have written around it a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right about that. Absolutely. So,
Well, I think
Always
even-
a white
I think-
guy in charge.
Well, I think
Always.
even if I think it would have, even if they wanted to play the storyline well, they could have even had it to where Ben Browder's character, that he was technically in charge, but he would keep deferring to Carter because she's got the experience and she's got the knowledge.
well, when they first announced
Wow.
that he was joining the cast, I thought he was joining to replace her. Like she would move to the commanding officer of the
Right.
team, and then
Yeah.
he comes in, and while she still has her scientific knowledge, he brings the military backup
Mhm.
that she was to O'Neill, that Carter was to O'Neill. That's what I thought was going to happen, and was kind of like a little annoyed that it didn't.
But you know,
Yeah.
one of my favorite all-time episodes, speaking of Carter, is Foothold. And that's where the aliens have taken over everybody in Cheyenne Mountain. And Carter is trying to get attention drawn to this. And it's kind of like watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which I'm sure is the inspiration, because you don't know who's a good guy and you don't know who's a bad guy. And basically, she saved all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple
it was her.
times.
So for me, that kind of made up for the sort of short shrift she got in the Hathor episode.
We don't talk about Hathor.
In the Egyptian
Actress is
redheaded
very
woman,
pleasant. I met her in Vancouver at the Gay Con. She's
Mhm.
very pleasant, but you're right as far as the character goes.
It's not her fault. She
No.
was dealing with
No,
what's written.
Well,
I've got
It
to
was
say
just
that
written that way.
I can't believe all you guys have missed the major inclusive moment of that. As Mark, you sort of touched on it earlier.
I did.
Okay, name a science fiction action adventure show where you've got the HR person.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
that is definitely an alien creature.
Oh, well, yeah.
Well, and they definitely had to put her on the universe ship. They couldn't have sent her to Atlantis because that just would have been
A nightmare.
Yeah, she would have just been way too busy. So
well, no, this is the other inside track. Hopefully, we never get to talk about the things that we tried to do in the comic book, bridging Atlantis and universe. Aside from the fact that I think there was a discontinuity in the even though were they on at the same time at one point?
Yeah.
So there's a little
I
bit of
think
an
they
overlap.
overlapped at the end.
There's a little bit of overlap, but like the calendar year within each universe is off a little bit. And so we were trying to figure that out at one point, but there is a she's played by Tamlin Tamita. She was the IOA representative that came to Atlantis a couple of times. Chang, yeah. And we had posited a scene where in this, was it in Atlantis or the Universe comic book?
It was in the universe comic.
It was in the Universe comic book where Camille
No,
Ray,
take it back, Atlantis. Sorry.
it was Camille Ray's character was trying to decide whether or not to take the posting to Icarus because she was trying to move up in the IOA. And she communicates with this other character just because we assumed that they kind of had the same role and they might have known each other through this organization. And of course, it was approved by MGM, then unapproved. But,
Yeah.
Oh.
yeah, it was-
and like they got real touchy about if the character hadn't actually appeared on the series. Well, we got around that with them radio transmissions a couple of times.
They wouldn't let us because his deal required special approval for his appearance. Richard Dean Anderson's character never visually appears in the comic, but we
had him invisible.
Point in Window of Opportunity makes reference to, I think,
Yeah.
being turned invisible. Like this is that time he was turned invisible, which was kind of done as a gag, but we picked up on that and said that it kind of recurred later and they don't know how to undo it. So generally there's just this coffee cup that's moving from Homeworld Command.
They said they were actually willing to go to him for approval for big scenes, but not for cameos.
Yeah. And we didn't, he was not, because you're telling a story in 20 some pages. There's not room for O'Neill if you're going to feature the cast that people are looking for in those particular comics. But anyway, I derailed it. Sorry.
Well, and I
just
think
a thought just came to me thinking about it. With Nancy was talking about with the episode of Foothold, that it's kind of an interesting. I'm sure it was completely coincidental, but the idea of the main character being the woman who's going to save it in a situation where all the men around and you don't know who is a bad guy or who's a good guy.
It's called life. It's very realistic.
Right, exactly. I mean, you want to. It really makes me wonder if there wasn't a woman somewhere in the writing process involved with that. That it's like. It was probably a coincidence, but man, that
Or
really,
someone
really,
talked to their wife or
Yeah.
sister or daughter
Yeah.
or any woman they've ever met.
Yeah.
And what, not being believed while you're saving
Right.
the day? That does that sound familiar, Nancy?
Yeah.
A bit.
All right, so we've got time for one more question at this point. So I will start with you, JC, and part of the reason being you're the next on my list, but also with Amazon buying MGM and all this talk now of potential new show, where do you think a new show would go? Where do you want it to go? Reboot, continuation?
It's really funny. I think that there's a tendency for all of us to impose our wish list on what this series would be. From a practical aspect, nobody's as young as they were. There's a toxic element of some fandom that doesn't want anything but the original and is only going to be happy if the original comes back exactly like it was and then doesn't change. And I sort of don't understand that, because that's not how I've ever approached fandom. I don't think my friends are not going to change, so why wouldn't what I like not change? But you can't imagine that a company as astute as Amazon is going to allow a science fiction franchise that ran for a record 10 years on American television, followed by 2 spinoffs, to languish in the situation that it's been allowed to in the recent, let's say, decade. It's almost inconceivable that you have something that has either no or next to no licensed merchandise out there, in addition to the show itself. I think that they've got the perfect vehicle to bring it back, and whether it is the Law and Order approach that we were starting to see to sort of seasons 8 and up, where you could bring in new cast members and the premise still works. I think they proved that very well. And they could drop in recurring, the older characters as recurring characters. I'm not a fan overall, of my personal opinion. I'm not a fan of reboots. I much prefer extending it. I think that's good. I think that looks to be what's going on with Ghostbusters. And I think that there's some power in that doesn't alienate those of us that were part of it originally, maybe keeps us in the fold and gets new people.
And wouldn't it be a perfect opportunity for Amanda Tapping to become CEO of the Stargate program?
Exactly.
Why not?
And that seems to be where they're trying to approach her. That's been the rumor, is that there's talk of her coming back, and I think that would be an interesting thing to see, is her being the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Or Gary Jones as Walter Merriman.
No, Walt. That to me, that needs to be the thing that hasn't changed. Walter is still the one operating the game.
Yes, still sitting there. Just
That's funny. Yeah,
Chevron 7 locked.
Mark
again.
Mark got me a photo before I was at GateCon and met him. Mark got me a photo, and it's signed "Make It Spin."
Well, it was Gary was at GateCon. I went 2 years before. Jeff and I went last year, so Gary was there, and one of the photographs that he sells is the puppets of him and Don
Davis.
Don Davis as General Hammond, from 200, right?
Right.
So, and so I was just like, you have to do this one. And then Jeff always would refer to Apophis as Dave Apophis.
Well, it's because Mark, we're watching the show and Mark asked me what's his first name. I said
I
Dave.
was like, what's his first name? I meant the actor actually, but 25 years later, it's still a joke. So of course I got the actor to sign.
Quick, he signed it to me.
Dave.
Quit calling me Dave.
Oh my god! I just want Christopher Judge to write "Indeed."
Yeah,
Like everything.
well, I should have got it saying where it allegedly performed well on DVD.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Rachel, what are your hopes?
Yes.
My hopes.
Yes.
I am very much reboots very rarely work. I sometimes feel like they feel a bit cheap. The only time I ever thought it worked is when you're doing like an alternate timeline thing. Like it works in superheroes, it kind of works in Star Trek, but this doesn't have that. I'd love to see a continuation. I'd like to see something like, oh my God, it's like we're trying to find other places to colonize in case climate change gets out of control, or that kind of thing. Like you can have it be a little more modern, a little bit slicker, a little more Star Trek Discovery-esque if you want. But you don't, so you can make it new and fresh and get new people, but you can still have like the older characters come back. I mean, they're due retirement by now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And just move forward. I mean, it would be stupid for them to give up that big a fandom, especially because of the international appeal, especially in Europe and Australia. I mean, it's a gold mine. They're going to sit on it. I just hope that they have fun with it and don't make it, like I said, you can make it more serious without making it dour. That's the one thing I'm afraid of, because the thing about Universe that didn't quite work with a lot of people was when you get a little too dour with snake aliens in your head and a whirling whirlpool that sends you across the universe, that's when it starts to fall flat. So it definitely needs a bit of humor.
Yeah, that was that was the switch to Universe in tone from Atlantis to Universe was probably the
Very
most
jarring
thing about it, where you're just like, but these are happy people. I didn't watch a happy
universe.
Yeah, exactly.
They may be killing each other, but it's a happy place.
But they're generally happy, you know.
With evil Lego that take over.
Have you seen the meme that says, are replicators good or bad? It's one of the companions asking Doctor Who. I think it's the Doctor 12. And he says, depends on the franchise. Star Trek, great. Stargate, not so much.
Exactly.
Well, they actually set it up in the universe to where Michael Judge would come back in. And let's just say, I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of him recently. The man is aging really, really well.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I mean, I'm kind of wondering if maybe he isn't, actually an alien, at the rate that he's aging. So, but that would set it up perfectly for him too, to be almost like a mentor type character.
Yeah.
For any new teams that are coming in, as far as any kind of consultations and stuff that.
Well, it would be like, I'll agree with Jeff and what we've said here before too. If I can jump in on the question, is the idea that reboot, no, continue the story, figure out where you would have gone. And I think that certainly having it be like a group of kids solving mysteries, probably not, but I mean, we were trying to, there is a potential that the publisher of the Stargate comics that we did may be doing more. He's trying to work that out now. And so he's asked us to come up with a couple more ideas. And we're, aside from throwing that Martin Lloyd thing back in there again, because I think that just needs to happen.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. I mean, I have to think after the last year or two, where the Air Force is now releasing, Air Force, Navy, the military, Department of Defense is releasing UFO footage, and people are like, yawn. I mean, I think you could actually have a show where they decide they are actually going to, pick up off of the episodes like Disclosure and 2010 and say, okay, let's push this show forward into like the 2040s or 50s, and Stargate travel's a commercially available thing, and what might have happened and because I don't know that it could stay a secret.
Any project manager knows you can't have 6 people not blab about something to every other team.
Right. And I mean,
but nobody's going to believe it anyway.
Well, right.
After this year,
yeah.
Hey, these trying times.
That's why they got Wormhole Extreme.
Yes, yes. Well, I liked how they started later. Atlantis touched on this much more so than SG1 did, which was they're starting to talk to the contractor figured out where the tech they were supposed to reverse engineer was coming from.
Mhm.
And I think some shows like that might be cool, but I think whatever they do, whatever they land on, the fact that they are talking to Brad Wright about it, and he's started up his podcast, and where I think he drops occasional hints because he's having like the guests, his guests on this podcast are Stargate cast members that he's having come back. So there's something going on there, but I think the ideal thing is going to be capturing the tone of SG1 and Atlantis. As much as I love Stargate Universe, you can't lead with that because, especially after the last 18 months, it's like people want and don't need that.
Yeah.
I'd
Bunch
like
of people
some happy,
trapped
silly.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I want to see some people succeed on television.
I just want to see hugging and gatherings.
And going outside.
Well, I'd
Yeah.
like to see a group who click, where the actors click with each other the way
Yeah.
everyone clicked.
And
Because it's like they have a really great relationship. I'd like to be part of that. So I park in front of the TV every week so I can be part of that. And then you can bring various and sundry other people. But as we've said in various ways during this program, the characters are really what have done it for all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think they need a core group of characters readers can really root for, and then they can expand from there. And as a longtime Legion of Superheroes fan, I am not a fan of reboots. The Legion has been rebooted so many times, I've forgotten how many there even
To the point that many of us are totally disinterested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and for me, and one of the things that if you look at Stargate, because we started with the Stargate and 7 chevrons, then it was we're going to Atlantis. We're hopping to another universe, so it's going to take 8. Or sorry, going to Atlantis, which is 8, and then universe, which is 9. I almost would like to see come back to a 20 years later where it's everything's kind of calmed down. We've got some space travel. We may or may not be telling people that that's what we were testing in the video, but whatever else. We've got some space travel. We've got the gate travel. We've got all these technologies. I'd like to see what have they done, and then see a nice baseline where things could be, then bring in the new antagonist. And I almost wonder if that would not have to be internal.
Yeah.
Bringing back the politics. How do we break this internally to make people go, can I just go back through the gate again? It's easier to be out there than it is over here.
Paperwork will kill you.
Yeah.
If the aliens don't.
But I mean, I'd like to see Carter come back and be the CEO. But I think that kind of that coming back and closing the loop would be fun to see.
Mm-hmm. And we can get to see the Furlings finally.
Yeah.
I know we technically got to see them briefly in 200, but
Yeah.
No, but I want to actually see them.
Right.
According,
They
Yeah.
can become the new Asgard.
here's what I have to say. Try mentioning them in a script.
Yeah, they flipped out. MGM flipped out on us. They're like, you can't even mention them. I'm like, what are you talking about?
And the best part was that I took one of the stories that Mark and I had done. We needed to do a 8-page prequel, and we slid a Furlings reference in there that they published. So it was approved. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they wouldn't approve it for the 8-page prequel to the same story.
It was really hit or miss with what we could get in, and the connection between the cast. Like the fact that they were able to have the cast, we considered it part of the show, is that it created this universe. And that's the thing, I think that if I had to say that what really makes me a fan of this franchise is how interconnected the three were, that you got the sense that this is a real place. And it's like shows like Star Trek actually relied, in the era of Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, relied on the art department visually to keep that stuff organized for you. And you see, there's a lot I like about the new crop of Star Trek shows, but they do not have that kind of shared universe feel.
Yeah.
And with Stargate, the writers took that on, the producers took that on, and so you'd have characters popping up here and there. And then when you try to do that in comic books, they're like, "Well, what if their deal says this and this other thing happens?" And so we finally got them to issue this thing. It's like if they appeared in that series, they're fair game. We still want to look at it, but it's fair game. So Jeff and I are like poring over the streaming episodes. Like if you even showed up for like a half a frame, like, you know, we're like, that character's fair game. You said so. Anyway. I am rambling.
Otherwise they were on the radio.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
All right.
No screen views, right? No screen views.
We tried.
We could probably go for.
We wanted Browder's character to come back, Cameron Mitchell. But
We could probably go for another couple hours.
Probably.
Definitely fertile ground. But we do have to stop for the night. And before we leave, though, let's go back around one more time, let people know where they can find you. And we'll start again with you, Rachel.
Once again, I am Rachel Carr, but I still write as R.E. Carr because I'm not a vegan cookbook author. You can find me at www.rachelecarr.com or as Total Recar on all the social medias. And I'm going to squeak because we've got actual comic book writers from Stargate. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to plug myself. Buy my stuff.
Mark.
So Mark Haynes wrote comic books for Stargate Atlanta, Stargate Universe with my good friend JC Vaughn. And you can find me on Twitter at Mark Haynes. It's the only social media that I was able to get my name with no suffixes or numbers. So I'm very proud of that. So
All right. Jim.
Jim Nettles, you can find me at jamesnettles.com. You can also find me at jim-mcdonald.net, authoressentials.net, continualconvention.com. Then, of course, on the old Facebook and occasionally the Hive of Scum and Villainy that is Twitter. I do throw some stuff out there on Instagram and a few other places as well. So I'm out there causing trouble.
Nancy.
I'm Nancy Northcott, and you can find me at www.nancynorthcott.com. I'm at Nancy Northcott on Twitter, and I actually do have a Facebook page, although you would not know that I was aware of it if you went and looked at it. And that's Nancy Northcott Author on Facebook, and obviously here at ConTinual.
All right. Bishop.
Bishop O'Connell still. You can find my blog website at aquietpint.com. I'm Bishop M. O'Connell on all of the social medias. And you can buy my stuff too if you want while you're at it, buying other people's stuff.
And finally, JC.
Second Wednesday, my first murder mystery novel is out now. It's on Amazon. You can find my Overstreet stuff at www.gemstonepub.com. And the Battles of the Cats here are going on. That's great. And I'm on Facebook, either JC Vaughn or Jeffrey Vaughn, one of many. And I'm on Twitter, sort of the way Nancy's on Facebook. You know, every once in a while, I remember I'm on Twitter and I'll go like a bunch of stuff that my friends have done, retweet them, and then, you know, that's about it. And that's it. I'm glad to be part of this.
Right.
Yep.
It was a lot of fun.
Do thank all of you for joining us and everyone for watching. See you next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jason.
Bye.
Bye.